No one can serve two masters. Deep down, each of us has surely felt our hearts waver, torn between choices. We want to spend time with family, but work sweeps us away. We want to live a serene life, but material temptations constantly beckon. In such moments, the teaching of Jesus Christ resonates with closeness and profoundness. No one can serve two masters. This teaching is not a dry prohibition, but a loving whisper, a deep understanding of human nature. The Lord knows that our hearts are inherently small and cannot be fully divided between two opposing paths, two conflicting life purposes. Like a person standing on two boats, sooner or later, they will fall into the water. When we try to please both God and the desires of the world, our souls become chaotic, weary, and can never find true peace. Choosing a single master for one's life means choosing a path, a compass to walk steadfastly. This is not an act of renunciation, but a wise focus. When we place our complete faith and love in one thing, we will find the strength to overcome all difficulties, find joy in simplicity, and tranquility in our souls. As the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once contemplated, purity of heart is to will one thing. For believers, that one thing is to walk in his love and guidance, so that each day lived is a day of finding true meaning and peace. The teaching as no one can serve two masters by Jesus Christ is not just a simple commandment. It is like a seed of truth that, when sown in the soil of the soul, will sprout and grow into a great tree with countless branches of profound philosophy, illuminating every corner of life. It is not a limitation, but an invitation to true freedom, a liberation from the inner conflicts and struggles that have exhausted us. From that intimate whisper, let us contemplate and explore its wise aspects together, to see that choosing one single master for our lives is not to lose, but to find everything. Before we begin, we kindly invite you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel to help spread this valuable content to your family and friends. We thank you, and now we invite you to listen. 1. The philosophy of Jesus. Total devotion. True loyalty cannot be divided. Just as a sculptor must focus their entire mind on the block of stone before them, our souls can only be directed towards one ultimate purpose to achieve perfection. Serving two masters creates a half-hearted attention, leading to mediocre results on both sides and a soul in a constant state of distraction and fatigue. On the dusty road to Jerusalem, Peter asked Jesus when he saw a Roman soldier who had just received an order from his centurion while hastily pocketing a bribe. Peter: "Teacher, that soldier obeys his superior, yet also follows his own greed. Will he be all right?" Jesus: "Peter, look at the shepherd over there. When a wolf comes, can he both protect his flock and run to pick delicious berries at the edge of the forest?" Peter: "No, teacher. He must choose one, either the flock or the berries. If he hesitates, he will lose both." Jesus smiled. The human mind is the same. It cannot guard the treasure of the kingdom of heaven while chasing after the glittering things along the way. That soldier may obey the centurion with his body, but his heart has already chosen greed as its master. 2. The philosophy of Jesus. Inner truth. Serving two masters creates a two-faced life, a deceit from within. A person will have to wear one mask to please one master and another for the other. This conflict erodes character, causing a loss of authenticity and peace. Choosing one master is to choose to live a consistent life, where words, thoughts, and actions are united as one. In a market in Capernaum, a wealthy merchant named Lucius bowed respectfully to Jesus, but then turned and yelled at a beggar blocking his way. The Apostle John saw this and wondered. John: Teacher, Lucius appears devout to you, yet is cruel to the poor. How can his heart contain two such contradictory things? Jesus: John, have you ever seen an olive tree bear figs? A spring cannot flow with both fresh and bitter water from the same source. Lucius wants to please both God and his own arrogant ego. But the tree inside him, the tree of compassion, is slowly dying because it has to nourish both. 3. The philosophy of Jesus, ultimate value. This teaching forces us to determine what truly has value in life. One cannot value both material wealth and spiritual richness at the same time, because their measures of value are completely different. One is about accumulation, the other about giving. One is finite, the other is eternal. Jesus was speaking to the people near the temple treasury. A tax collector named Zenas, who worked for Rome while trying to keep the law of Moses, approached and asked, Zenas: Rabbi, I collect taxes for Caesar. That is my job. But I also give a tithe to the temple. Am I serving both? Jesus held up a denarius. Whose image is on this coin? Zenas: Emperor Tiberius's, sir. Jesus: Then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. But Zenas, your heart, your true treasure, whose image does it bear? You cannot use the value of this coin to measure the value of piety. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You cannot bury it in two places, one in Rome and one in heaven. 4. The philosophy of Jesus, freedom and slavery. Many people think that serving the world brings freedom, but it is actually a subtle form of slavery. We become slaves to money, to fame, to fear and anxiety. Conversely, choosing to serve God, though it may seem restrictive, is the path to true freedom, liberating the soul from the chains of materialism. A rich young Roman man came to Jesus, saying he had kept all the commandments. Jesus: That is good. But if you want to be perfect, go. Sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and then come, follow me. The young man went away sad, because he had great wealth. The Apostle Andrew: Teacher, why did you ask for something so difficult? That wealth is his own achievement. Jesus: Andrew, I did not take his wealth. I wanted to free him from it. He thinks he is the master of his possessions, but in reality, his possessions are his master. He cannot freely follow me because the golden chain has bound his feet. He wants to walk, but his other master will not allow it. 5. The philosophy of Jesus, the source of peace. A divided mind is a mind that never has peace. Anxiety and restlessness arise from trying to balance opposing demands. True peace only comes when we have a single heart and a single direction. The purity of the heart is to will one thing. Martha was busy preparing a lavish meal for Jesus, while her sister Mary sat at his feet, listening to his words. Martha complained, Martha, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Jesus gently replied, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You want to serve me with a lavish meal, but you are also serving your own anxiety. That is why your heart has no rest. 6. The philosophy of Jesus, the daily choice. Loyalty to one master is not decided by a single solemn declaration, but is built through countless small choices every day. From how we use our time, how we spend our money, to how we treat others. Every choice is a brick, building the temple for the Master we worship. A farmer asked Jesus by the Sea of Galilee. The farmer, "Teacher, I believe in God, but sometimes I have to use a little trickery in business to provide for my family. Is that wrong?" Jesus pointed to the fishermen mending their nets. "Look, they cannot mend their nets with rotten threads. Your loyalty is like that net. Every time you choose deceit, no matter how small, you are using a rotten thread to mend your net. When you need to cast the biggest net, it will tear apart. You cannot want the sturdy net of the kingdom of heaven while using the deceitful threads of the world." 7. The philosophy of Jesus, faith and worry. Serving material possessions stems from anxiety about the future. Worry about what to eat, what to wear, where to live. Serving God stems from absolute trust in His providence. Choosing God as Master is to choose to live in trust, instead of being worn down by endless anxiety. In a field of vibrant lilies, a crowd surrounded Jesus, many with worried faces because of the harvest and Roman taxes. "Jesus, see how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will He not much more clothe you, you of little faith?" A woman asked, "But teacher, if we do not worry, how can we live?" Jesus, worry is your second master. It promises you security, but only brings burdens. Your Father in heaven knows what you need, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Do not be a slave to tomorrow's worries. 8. The philosophy of Jesus, the nature of love. The phrase, "For either he will hate the one and love the other," shows that this is not just a matter of action, but of affection, of the heart's attachment. A person cannot sincerely love two opposing things. Love demands exclusivity and completeness. Where there is love, there is devotion. A Roman soldier stationed in Judea, who was sympathetic to the teachings of Jesus, asked the Apostle Thomas privately. The soldier, "I love the peace that your teacher teaches, but I also love the glory and strength of the Roman Empire. Can I love both?" Thomas, remembering his teacher's words, replied, "Jesus once said, 'No one can love two masters. When the command of Caesar requires you to use the sword, and the command of God requires you to love your enemy, which way will your heart lean?' You will find that the love for one will diminish the love for the other. True love is not a compromise. It is a choice. 9. The philosophy of Jesus, clarity. Serving two masters makes a person's vision blurry. Like looking through a smudged magnifying glass, everything is distorted and difficult to distinguish. When there is only one master, one purpose, the vision becomes clear. We will see clearly what is truth and what is illusion, which is the right path and which is a dead end. Jesus and his disciples passed by a Roman court where scribes and judges were arguing about the law. The Apostle Matthew, "Teacher, the law of Rome and the law of Moses sometimes conflict. How do we know what is right?" Jesus, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. When you try to see with both eyes, one eye of worldly law and one eye of the kingdom of heaven, the image will be blurred. You will not see true righteousness clearly. But when you look only with the eye of faith, everything will become clear. You will know what to do, not because the law compels you, but because your heart has seen the path clearly. 10. The philosophy of Jesus, the final destination. Two masters not only give different commands in daily life, but they also lead to two completely different destinations. The path of serving the world, though strewn with roses, will ultimately lead to nothingness. The path of serving God, though it may be narrow and difficult, leads to eternal life. Today's choice determines tomorrow's destiny. As sunset fell on the hill near Bethany, Jesus spoke to the crowd. Jesus, there is a master who promises you fine wine, feasts, and glory in a house built on sand. The other master promises you plain water, simple bread, and labor in a house built on rock. Tonight, while you are merry, the house on the sand seems more attractive. But I tell you the truth, the storm will come. And when the storm comes, the house on the sand will collapse, and its fall will be great. But the house on the rock will stand firm. Someone in the crowd cried out, "But how will we know when the storm is coming?" Jesus looked at them, his eyes full of compassion. You do not need to know when the storm will come. You only need to know today for which master you are building your house. 11. The philosophy of Jesus, the clarity of will. When serving two masters, a person's will becomes contradictory and weak. We want this, yet we also desire that. This struggle paralyzes the ability to decide and act decisively. A pure will, directed towards a single master, creates an extraordinary inner strength, turning thought into action. A potter in Bethany lamented to Jesus as he ruined a pot. The potter, "Teacher, my hands want to shape this pot beautifully to offer to the temple, but my mind keeps thinking about making a few cheap ones to sell to the Roman soldiers for a quick profit. As a result, I've ruined both." Jesus picked up a piece of clay. When you shape clay, if your hands both push in and pull out, what shape will it become? The potter, "Sir, it will become nothing, just a mess." Jesus, your will is also clay. You cannot want to offer to God while also wanting to indulge the greed of the world. Choose one direction for the hands of your soul, and you will create beautiful vessels for the kingdom of heaven. 12. The philosophy of Jesus, the unity of memory. Serving two masters creates a fragmented past. We will have memories belonging to this master and memories belonging to that master. This creates regret and torment. When we choose one master, all memories, whether happy or sad, are brought together, becoming valuable lessons on a single path, creating a coherent and meaningful life story. An elderly woman sat by the road, telling Jesus about her life with many regrets. The woman, "If only in my youth I hadn't chased after the parties of the Romans. Perhaps I would have a warmer family now. I wanted to live by the law of my ancestors, but I also loved to have fun. Looking back now, I see my life as a patchwork quilt." Jesus, "Madam, when people weave cloth, they use only one type of thread for one garment. If they keep changing threads, the garment will never be strong or beautiful. But do not despair. From today, choose the single thread of faith and begin to weave again. God can turn the patchwork quilt of your life into a colorful tapestry of mercy. 13. The philosophy of Jesus, the purity of worship. Worship is not just an external ritual, but reverence from the depths of the heart. One cannot offer a sincere prayer to God while the heart is still calculating and scheming for worldly purposes. True worship requires a soul completely devoted to the one being worshipped, unclouded by other masters. In the temple courtyard, a Pharisee prayed loudly, recounting his own merits. Nearby, a tax collector just bowed his head, beat his breast, and asked for mercy. The Apostle Bartholomew asked, "Teacher, that Pharisee seems to be serving God very well." Jesus, look closely. The Pharisee offers his prayer to God, but his heart worships another master called his own righteousness. He wants both God and the admiration of men, but the tax collector, he knows he has nothing, so he has offered his entire broken heart to God alone. Whose prayer will ascend higher? 14. The philosophy of Jesus. The burden of deceit. Serving two masters is to carry the burden of deceit. We must constantly lie, cover up, and act. This burden is invisible, but erodes our vitality and joy for life. Conversely, walking in the truth of a single master brings lightness and serenity, because we no longer have anything to hide. A guard of King Herod sought Jesus at night. The guard, "Teacher, by day I must praise King Herod, but at night my heart turns to your teachings. I feel like I am carrying two burdens." Jesus, have you ever seen a man use two different yokes on one ox? It will injure the ox and prevent it from walking straight. The truth is a yoke that is easy and light. Deceit is a yoke that is crooked and heavy. You cannot carry both. Take off the yoke that is hurting you, and take my yoke upon you, and you will find rest for your soul. 15. The philosophy of Jesus, the direction of desire. Human desire is like a river. It needs a clear riverbed to flow to the great sea. Serving two masters causes desire to be split into two branches, flowing aimlessly and never reaching its destination. Focusing desire on one ultimate purpose creates a force that sweeps away all obstacles. Jesus and his disciples saw a boy crying because he had dropped a coin, while his other hand was trying to hold a small bird. The Apostle Jude Thaddeus said, "The poor boy." Jesus. Human desire is like the boy's hands. It wants to hold both the coin of the world and the bird of the kingdom of heaven. But to catch the bird, sometimes you must open your hand and let the coin fall. Your hearts cannot intensely desire both material comfort and the adventure of faith at the same time. You will have to choose what you truly want more. 16. The philosophy of Jesus. True sacrifice. Sacrifice is not giving up bad things, but giving up good things to choose something better. When serving two masters, we cannot make a complete sacrifice because we always try to keep something for the other master. The noblest sacrifice can only come from a heart that has decided to offer everything to a single master. A poor widow put two small coins into the offering box, while many rich people put in large sums. Jesus called his disciples to him, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Peter wondered, "But what are two coins worth?" Jesus. The rich gave a part to God, but kept the larger part for the master called wealth. This widow had no other master but God. She gave up both masters she had in her hand. Her sacrifice was complete. 17. The philosophy of Jesus, the language of the heart. Each master has his own language. The language of the world is power, profit, and competition. The language of God is love, forgiveness, and service. A person cannot be fluent in both languages. The words that come out of our mouths will reveal which language our heart is truly using. A Pharisee named Nicodemus came to argue with Jesus. He used the sharp words of the law. Jesus. Nicodemus, you speak to me in the language of law and reason. That is a good language. But to understand the kingdom of heaven, you must learn a new language, the language of the Spirit, born from above. Nicodemus: How can I do that? Jesus: When a person loves someone, they will naturally learn their language. When your heart truly chooses God as its master, you will begin to understand the language of love. You cannot argue in the language of judgment while listening in the language of mercy. 18. The philosophy of Jesus, false security. Serving two masters often stems from a desire for security. We think that if we rely on both sides, we will never fall. But in reality, it is the most dangerous position, like standing between two boats. True security comes not from having many supports, but from trusting completely in the one and only most solid support. A storm arose on the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples were terrified. The disciples: Lord, save us! We're going to drown! Jesus, who was sleeping at the stern, woke up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. He turned to the disciples: You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Later, he explained, During the storm, you trusted in the strength of the boat, you trusted in your own experience, and you also tried to call on me. You were trying to hold on to three masters at once. That division created your fear. If you had trusted in me alone from the beginning, you would have had peace even in the midst of the storm. 19. The philosophy of Jesus, the price of compromise. Serving two masters always requires compromise. We have to sacrifice a little principle here, a little integrity there. Gradually, these small compromises will erode our character and shift our moral compass. Absolute loyalty has no room for compromise on core values. Governor Pilate stood between Jesus and the shouting crowd. He knew Jesus was innocent. Pilate, privately to a soldier: I find no basis for a charge against this man. But if I release him, the people will riot, and Caesar will not be pleased. He tried to serve both justice and political power. In the end, to please the crowd, he washed his hands and handed Jesus over to them. Later, the disciples recalled the event. John said, Pilate tried to serve two masters. He wanted to do what was right, but he was afraid of displeasing his master in Rome. His compromise led to the death of an innocent man and unrest in his own conscience. He lost both. 20. The philosophy of Jesus, simplifying life. Modern life becomes complicated because we have too many masters: work, family, passions, social media, financial pressure. Each master demands time and energy. Choosing one supreme master is a way to radically simplify life. All other decisions will automatically be arranged in a clear order of priority, bringing serenity. A scholar from Alexandria, who had read hundreds of scrolls, came to Jesus. The scholar: Teacher, I have studied Greek philosophy, Roman law, and the words of the prophets. There is so much to know, so many paths. I am confused. Jesus pointed to a mustard tree. The mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. But when it grows, it becomes a large tree for the birds of the air to perch in. Do not try to master the whole forest. Just find one single seed of truth and cultivate it. When you choose God as your master, all other knowledge will find its proper place around that tree. Your life will become as simple as a seed, yet as great as a tree. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 21. The philosophy of Jesus, the nature of creativity. True creativity arises from a free and focused soul. When torn between two purposes, a person's creative energy is consumed by resolving internal conflicts. Only when the soul is freed from division can it soar and create new values, whether in art, science, or in the way of daily life. A musician was playing a lyre at a wedding in Cana. He played a cheerful Greek song, then switched to a sad Hebrew psalm, and the sound became disjointed. The Apostle Andrew remarked, "His music does not touch the heart." Jesus explained, because he is trying to please both the drunken Romans and the devout Jews at the same party, his soul does not know whether to be happy or sad. Therefore, his music has no soul. A good piece of music must be born from a complete emotion. You cannot compose for the self and compose for God at the same time. 22. The philosophy of Jesus, the power of refusal. Choosing one master means we must learn to say no to the other master. Inner strength is not only shown in what we agree to do, but also in what we decisively refuse. Every time we say no to a temptation, a wrong demand, we are affirming our loyalty and strengthening the authority of the one we have chosen. In the wilderness, after fasting for 40 days, the devil came to tempt Jesus. He promised him all the kingdoms of the world if he would worship him. The devil, "I will give you all their authority and splendor if you will worship me." Jesus answered, "It is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" When the disciples heard him recount this, they were amazed. Jesus added, "Strength comes not only from accepting my Father's will, but also from refusing all other invitations, no matter how attractive they may be. Saying no to a false master is the most powerful yes to the true master. 23. The philosophy of Jesus. True empathy. When we serve two masters, our empathy becomes superficial. We may appear to sympathize with others, but in our hearts, we are calculating our own benefits. True empathy requires us to put ourselves completely in another's place, and this can only happen when we are freed from the selfish ego, which is a very demanding master. A tax collector named Levi, Matthew, held a banquet for Jesus and his friends, people considered sinners by society. The Pharisees muttered, "Pharisees, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus heard this and said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Later he said to his disciples, "The Pharisees cannot sit at the same table with these people because they are serving the master external purity. That master does not allow them to be defiled. But when you serve only the master love, you will find you can sit with anyone, because your hearts are no longer afraid." 24. The philosophy of Jesus, the legacy left behind. Every person leaves a legacy, whether large or small. The legacy of one who serves two masters is a vague story, full of contradictions and missed opportunities. The legacy of one who serves one master is a straight path, a shining example, and an inspiration for those who follow. How do we want to be remembered? The answer lies in whom we choose as our master. Jesus and his disciples passed by two tombs. One was a magnificent tomb of Roman marble, belonging to a rich official. The other was just a simple pile of stones, belonging to a martyred prophet. The Apostle Thomas said, "The man in the magnificent tomb must have had a successful life." Jesus. He served Caesar very well, and also tried to offer sacrifices to the temple. He had both, but now he is remembered only as a name on a stone. But the prophet, he served God alone, and for that he lost his life. But his words live on in the hearts of the people. A person's legacy is not measured by the wealth they accumulate, but by the truth they lived and died for. 25. The philosophy of Jesus, the courage to be hated. The phrase, "we'll hate the one and love the other," also implies that when we choose to love one master, we will surely be hated by the other master and those who serve it. Courage is not trying to please everyone, but being willing to accept hatred and misunderstanding from the world to remain loyal to God. After Jesus healed many people, his fame spread, but it also made many people hate him. His mother, Mary, worriedly said, "Son, why do you anger the scribes and Pharisees? Can you not be more moderate?" Jesus looked at his mother with love. "Mother, if a doctor gives his patient sweet candies instead of bitter medicine, is he a good doctor? I have come to speak the truth of my Father. That truth is sweet to those who seek it, but bitter to those who live in falsehood. I cannot please them and please my Father at the same time. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." 26. The philosophy of Jesus, the order of love. Love has an order. When we put God as our master, we do not reject love for family, friends, or work. On the contrary, we put them in their proper place, in an order illuminated by the greatest love. Love God first, and then we will know how to love others rightly and more purely. A man said to Jesus, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father, and then I will follow you." Jesus replied, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." This sounds harsh, but later he explained to his disciples, "I did not tell him not to love his father, but if he puts his duty to his family above the call of God, he will forever be bound by worldly duties. When he puts the kingdom of heaven first, he will understand that the best way to honor his Father is to live a life of eternal significance. Choosing a master is not about erasing other loves, but about rearranging them in their proper order. 27. The philosophy of Jesus, discerning one's calling. Every person has a calling, a unique mission. This calling is the voice of the true master. When we are busy listening to the demands of many other masters, that voice becomes faint and hard to hear. Inner silence, which comes from eliminating the noise of false masters, is a necessary condition to recognize and walk in our calling. The young boy Samuel was sleeping in the temple when he heard a voice calling. He thought it was the high priest Eli calling him. After 3 times, Eli realized it was the Lord's voice. Jesus recounted this story and said, "Your souls are like Samuel. God is always calling your name. But you think it is the call of work, of family, of ambition. You run to the Elis of the world and ask what they want. Learn to be still, and when you hear the call, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.' You will not be able to hear the voice of the true master if your ears are full of the voices of false masters. 28. The philosophy of Jesus. True joy. The joy that the world, the first master, brings is often short-lived, dependent on external circumstances, and often leaves an empty aftertaste. The joy that God, the second master, gives is deep, lasting, independent of external circumstances, and can exist even in adversity. It is impossible to seek both types of joy at the same time. The disciples returned from their preaching mission, overjoyed. The disciples, "Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name." Jesus shared in their joy. But then he said, "However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." He explained further, The joy of victory over demons is a joy that comes from power. It can come and go. But the joy of belonging to my Father is an eternal joy that no one can take away. Do not build your happiness on what you can do, but build it on who you are in God's eyes. 29. The philosophy of Jesus. Dependence that brings strength. The world teaches that strength comes from independence and self-reliance. But this philosophy shows that true strength comes from complete dependence on the one and only correct master. Like a branch on a vine, it only has life and bears fruit when it is connected to the vine. Separated from the vine, it will die. Dependence on God is not weakness, but connection to an infinite source of strength. Jesus used the parable of the vine and the branches. Jesus, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. The Apostle Philip asked, "Then where is our freedom if we must depend completely on you?" Jesus, does the branch have the freedom to separate from the vine? Yes, but that is the freedom to die. The true freedom of the branch is to remain on the vine, receive its life, and bear fruit. Dependence on the world will cause you to wither. Dependence on me will cause you to bear life. 30. The philosophy of Jesus, the path of transformation. Ultimately, choosing a single master is not a static decision, but a continuous path of transformation. Serving the world will make us more and more like the world, selfish, anxious, and temporary. Serving God will transform us to become more like Him, loving, peaceful, and eternal. We become what we worship. On Mount Tabor, Jesus was transfigured. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Peter, James, and John were amazed. When they came down the mountain, Peter was still in awe. "Teacher, how could that happen?" Jesus answered, "What you saw is the image of a person who belongs completely to God. When a person serves only one master, the Father in heaven, the Father's light will shine through them." He looked at his disciples. "You too, do not just try to follow my laws. Let my very presence transform you from within. Each day, when you choose me instead of the world, a little darkness in you will disappear and a little light will be added. That is the path of serving one master, the path of transformation. 31. The philosophy of Jesus, true rest. The world also promises rest, but it is the rest of the body through pleasure and material comforts. It is a recharging of energy to continue serving. The rest that God gives is the peace of the soul, a state of ceasing from struggle, ceasing from worry, and complete surrender. A divided heart can never truly rest, because one of the two masters will always be demanding, stirring it up. On the Sabbath, the disciples were following Jesus through a grain field and began to pick some heads of grain to eat. The Pharisees saw this and rebuked them. "Pharisees, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Later he said privately to his disciples, "The Pharisees try to serve both God and another master called observance of the law. They rest their bodies, but their minds still work hard to keep every rule. True rest is not ceasing from labor, but ceasing to serve fear and the ego. When you lay all your burdens on the Father in heaven, you will find true rest, even while your hands are working. 32. The philosophy of Jesus, the lens of judgment. When we serve God, the lens we use to see others is mercy. We see their hurts, their burdens, and their weaknesses. When we serve the world, the lens we use is comparison and judgment. We see their faults, their shortcomings, and their position relative to ours. We cannot wear both pairs of glasses at the same time. How we see others reveals who we are serving. A woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus. They said that according to the law of Moses, she should be stoned. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first. Jesus said to his disciples, "They came here in the name of God's law, but they looked at this woman through the lens of self-righteousness. They wanted to please both God and their own judgmental ego. When I invited them to look at themselves, that lens shattered. Only when you drop the stone of judgment from your hand do you have enough room to extend the hand of mercy." 33. The philosophy of Jesus, the quality of work. All work, even the most mundane, can become an act of worship or a service to the world. When we work for money, fame, or power, we will do just enough to achieve our goal. When we work as an offering to God, we will do it with all our dedication and excellence, not because of who is watching, but because of the one we are serving. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were mending their nets with their father. They worked very carefully and meticulously. Another fisherman friend teased, "Hey, hurry up and finish mending so we can go out to sea. No one pays extra for beautiful knots." Jesus passed by, smiled and said, "People use the best materials to build a house for the Roman governor. Why is it that when you mend a net to feed your family, a work blessed by God, you do it carelessly?" He looked at James and John. "Your work is not just about catching fish. It is a prayer with your hands. When you work for an invisible but eternal master, the quality of your work becomes the signature of your loyalty." 34. The philosophy of Jesus, the management of time. Time is the most precious asset. Those who serve the world always feel a lack of time, because they try to cram in too many activities to serve many purposes. Those who serve God understand that time is a gift. They do not try to master time, but offer it to the master of time. Then they will have enough time for the things that are truly important. A rich merchant came to Jesus, boasting that he worked from morning till night to secure his future. The merchant: "I have no time to pray or reflect, teacher. My business with the Romans and Greeks takes up my whole day." Jesus told a parable. A rich man's ground yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" He concluded, "He served tomorrow, but forgot the master of today." When you offer a part of your time to God, He does not take it away. He sanctifies it and makes the rest more meaningful. 35. The philosophy of Jesus, the courage to be small. The world glorifies greatness, power, and influence. It is a master that constantly urges us to be bigger, to have more. God, however, often works through small, humble things. To choose to serve Him is to have the courage to accept a small role in the eyes of the world, believing that the silent acts of loyalty have eternal value. The disciples were arguing about who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus called a little child to Him and placed the child among them. And He said, "Truly I tell you, Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." He explained further, "People of the world seek to build great pyramids so their names will be remembered. That is how they serve the master fame. But the kingdom of heaven is built with humble stones, with silent acts of service that no one sees. The courage to be anonymous for the sake of the kingdom is greater than the courage to conquer the whole world." 36. The philosophy of Jesus, the burden of ownership. We often think that we possess wealth, but in reality, wealth possesses us. Every item we own is a binding thread, a concern. Serving God does not mean living in poverty, but changing our relationship with possessions, from ownership to stewardship. We are only stewards for the true master, and that brings great freedom. Zacchaeus, a wealthy tax collector, climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus. Jesus called him down and went to his house. After the encounter, Zacchaeus stood up and said, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Later, Matthew asked Jesus, "What made him change like that?" Jesus replied, "Until this morning, Zacchaeus was serving the master wealth. When I entered his house, he realized he could choose a new master. By giving away his possessions, he did not become poorer. He simply cast off the burden on his shoulders, cut the strings that bound his heart. He exchanged a demanding master for a merciful father." 37. The philosophy of Jesus, the language of silence. The world is a noisy master. It shouts, demanding our attention through dizzies us, anxieties, and distractions. God, however, often speaks in a whisper, in the silence of the soul. We cannot hear the whisper if we are in the middle of a noisy marketplace. We must intentionally choose silence, refuse the noise of the other master, to be able to hear the guidance of the true master. Jesus often withdrew from the crowds to pray alone on a mountain. Peter once said, "Teacher, everyone is looking for you. Why are you here alone?" Jesus replied, "Peter, a shepherd cannot hear the call of each sheep if he is standing in a shouting crowd. My Father is the same. To hear his will, I must escape the voice of the world, the voice that demands miracles, that demands bread. In silence I find my direction again. You too do not be afraid of silence. That is where the true master is waiting to speak to you." 38. The philosophy of Jesus, the ground of miracles. Miracles do not arise from calculation or preparation. They arise from the ground of absolute faith. When we try to serve 2 masters, we are hedging our bets. If God doesn't act, we still have plan B. We still have money. We still have connections. This very hedging makes the soil of faith barren. Miracles only happen when we dare to walk on water, completely trusting in a single master. Jesus walked on the water and called Peter to him. Peter got out of the boat and walked for a distance, but when he saw the strong wind, he was afraid and began to sink. Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" When they had climbed into the boat, he explained, "When your eyes were on me, you were serving faith alone, and you did the impossible. But when you started to look at the waves, you let another master called fear intervene. You tried to walk by both faith and doubt, and those two cannot coexist. Miracles only happen at the last step of reason and the first step of faith." 39. The philosophy of Jesus, the meaning of suffering. For one who serves the world, Suffering is a failure, a meaningless thing to be avoided at all costs. For one who serves God, suffering can become a tool, a fire that tests faith and purifies the soul. The same event, but its meaning is completely different depending on who we are offering it to. Jesus was told that his friend Lazarus was seriously ill, but he did not go immediately. When he arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Martha, Lazarus' sister, wept, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus, after raising Lazarus from the dead, said to his disciples, "In the eyes of the world, Lazarus' death was a tragedy. It was the victory of the master decay. But in my Father's plan, this suffering was an opportunity for his glory to be revealed. Do not be afraid when you face suffering. Ask, 'Lord, how can I offer this pain to you?' Instead of being a burden, it can become an offering." 40. The philosophy of Jesus, the foundation of community. A community built on common interests and social connections is a community of the world. It will dissolve when the interests are no longer there. A true community, a true brotherhood, can only be built on a single foundation, serving one master together. Then unity comes not from looking at each other, but from all looking in the same direction. At the Last Supper, Jesus washed his disciples' feet, an act of a servant. Peter refused. "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." After washing everyone's feet, he said, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. You cannot build a community when each person is trying to serve their own ego, but when all of you stoop to serve one another, because you all serve one master, who is me, then you will become one body." Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 41. The philosophy of Jesus. The illusion of control. One of the biggest reasons people try to serve two masters is the illusion of control. We believe that by relying on both God and the resources of the world, we can control our lives and our future. The truth is, the more we try to control, the more we become slaves to the fear of losing control. Peace only comes when we dare to let go and entrust control to the only one who is truly in charge. A man came to ask Jesus to settle an inheritance dispute with his brother. Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" He turned to the crowd and said, "Watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." He was saying, this man is trying to control his share of the property. He serves the master justice according to his own will. He thinks that if he gets that share, his life will be secure. That is an illusion. Security comes not from controlling what you have, but from trusting in the one who gave you life. 42. The philosophy of Jesus. The flow of grace. The grace of God is like water, always flowing to the lowest place. It cannot fill a cup that is already full of other things. When our hearts are filled with the worries, ambitions, and plans of the world, there is no room for grace to flow in. Choosing one master is an act of emptying our souls, making them humble and ready to be filled. Jesus spoke with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. Jesus, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst." The woman asked for this water. Jesus then spoke of her private life, of the 5 husbands she had had. Later, John explained the deeper meaning. This woman's soul well had tried to be filled by many different masters, the relationships of the world, but they never satisfied her. Only when she realized her emptiness and confessed it could Jesus give her the living water. Grace cannot be mixed with what the world offers. You have to pour out the old water to receive the new. 43. The philosophy of Jesus, the test of perseverance. Perseverance is not a blind force. The direction of perseverance is what matters. Those who serve the world may be very persistent in pursuing wealth, but will eventually become tired and disappointed. The perseverance of the faithful is nourished by hope in a master who never changes. They persevere not by their own strength, but by the strength of the one they serve. Jesus told the parable of the sower. Some seeds fell along the path, on rocky places, among thorns, and on good soil. He explained, "The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature." A disciple asked, "How do we become good soil?" Jesus answered, "Good soil is not just about receiving the seed. It is also about the perseverance of rooting deeply, overcoming drought, and fighting against weeds. When you have only one master, your roots will focus on a single source of water. When you try to serve many masters, your roots will spread on the surface and be easily uprooted. 44. The philosophy of Jesus, the gift of presence. The mind of one who serves 2 masters is always divided. When here, they think of another place. When doing this, they worry about that. They lose the most precious gift, full presence in the present moment. Only when the soul has a single anchor can it dwell in the here and now. To truly live, truly listen, and truly love. At a meal in a Pharisee's house, a sinful woman came, wept, and wet Jesus' feet with her tears, wiped them with her hair, and then anointed them with perfume. The Pharisee thought to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is." Jesus read his thoughts. "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet. But she," he recounted all her actions. He wanted to say, "Pharisee, you are sitting here with me, but your mind is busy judging and serving the master purity. But this woman, she has nothing but this moment to offer me. She is fully present. Therefore, she has received forgiveness, while you have only received a lesson." 45. The philosophy of Jesus, the nature of prosperity. The world defines prosperity by getting. Having more money, more power, more friends. God defines prosperity by giving. True prosperity is not in how much we can accumulate, but in how much we can give away without feeling loss. This can only happen when we believe that our source of supply is infinite, coming from a generous master. After Jesus fed the 5,000, the people wanted to make him king. They thought, "This king can give us bread every day. This is prosperity." Jesus withdrew. Later he said, "I am the bread of life that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever." He was teaching, "You are looking for a master who can fill your stomachs. That is the prosperity of the world. I have come to give you a different kind of prosperity. A heart that can give unconditional love. A soul that can share limitless hope. That is true wealth, because the more you give, the more you have." 46. The philosophy of Jesus, the path of repentance. Repentance is not just regret for a wrong action. Repentance in Greek metanoia means a complete change of mind. It is an inner revolution. We cannot change our minds if we are still trying to look in two directions. True repentance is a decisive act of turning away from the old master to turn completely to the new master. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. When the rooster crowed, he remembered Jesus' words and went outside and wept bitterly. After Jesus rose, he met Peter by the sea. Jesus did not ask, "Why did you deny me?" He only asked 3 times, "Simon, do you love me?" With each of Peter's answers, Jesus gave him a mission: feed my sheep. He was teaching that Peter's repentance was not just tears, it was a turning back, a reaffirmation of loyalty to a single master. And the proof of that repentance is not torment, but action in service. You cannot truly return if you still have 1 foot left with the master fear and weakness. 47. The philosophy of Jesus, the vision of beauty. The world defines beauty through perfection, symmetry, splendor, and youth. It is a very cruel master, because that beauty will fade. Beauty in God's eyes, however, is often found in unexpected places, in brokenness, in sacrifice, in the scars of love. We cannot feel the beauty of a grain of wheat that dies if we are still worshipping the beauty of a flower that blooms in the morning and fades in the evening. Jesus was scourged, crowned with thorns, and carried his cross. In the eyes of the Romans and passers-by, it was an ugly, shameful sight, a failure. A Roman soldier, the centurion, after witnessing everything, exclaimed, "Surely this man was the Son of God." What did the centurion see? He was no longer looking through the eyes of the master power and Roman glory. For a moment, he saw a different kind of beauty, the beauty of love that endures to the end, the beauty of forgiveness in the midst of pain. He saw the beauty of a master willing to become ugly to save humanity. 48. The philosophy of Jesus, the authority behind the words. Whether our words have weight does not depend on volume or eloquence. It depends on the authority behind them. When we speak as servants of our ego, of personal gain, our words are empty. When we speak as those sent by a master greater than ourselves, our words carry an authority that has the power to move and transform. When Jesus taught in the synagogue, the people were amazed. They said to each other, "Where did this man get these things? What's this wisdom that has been given him? His teaching is authoritative, not like our scribes." What was the difference? The scribes taught based on the authority of those who came before them, of the law. They served the master tradition. Jesus taught with direct authority from his Father. He did not quote anyone. He was the source. His words had weight because they came from an absolute and single loyalty. 49. The philosophy of Jesus, the anatomy of temptation. Every temptation, in essence, is an invitation to serve 2 masters. It never says, "Abandon God." It says, "Keep God and have this too." It invites us to believe that we can have both security in God and the immediate gratification of the world. Recognizing this structure is the first step to overcoming temptation. Once again, look at the temptation in the wilderness. The devil said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." He did not say, "You are not the Son of God." He said, "Use your power as the Son of God to serve your physical needs." It was an invitation to serve both his Father and his stomach. Jesus answered, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." He refused to serve 2 masters. He affirmed that there is only one source of life worth serving. 50. The philosophy of Jesus. The will of the kingdom of heaven. Ultimately, the choice of master determines the inheritance we receive. Those who serve the world, no matter how much they accumulate, will eventually leave it all behind. Their legacy is dust and ashes. Those who serve God, though they may seem to have nothing in hand, are inheriting a fortune that cannot be destroyed by moths or stolen by thieves, the kingdom of heaven itself. Choosing a master today is signing the will of tomorrow. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus announced the will for those who choose him as their master. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Each blessed are is a promise of a part of the eternal inheritance. These are not things we can hold now. It is an inheritance that comes from a relationship. By refusing to serve wealth, power, and pride, they chose a single master, and their reward is not an earthly kingdom, but the very presence of the King. 51. The philosophy of Jesus, the compass of imagination. The imagination is one of the most powerful human faculties. It is where we build the future, recall the past, and shape reality. When serving the world, our imagination will be filled with scenarios of success, revenge, desire, and anxiety. When serving God, the imagination becomes a space for prayer, for envisioning goodness, and for dreaming of the kingdom of heaven. A divided heart will have a chaotic imagination. The apostle Nathanael was sitting and thinking when Jesus approached him. Jesus: Nathanael, when I first called you, I saw you under the fig tree. What were you thinking then? Nathanael smiled, remembering his astonishment. Jesus continued, The human imagination is like fertile ground. You can let the world sow weeds of envy, schemes of self-interest, and invisible fears. Or you can turn it into a garden to meet the Father in heaven, to imagine how you can help a brother, to dream of a more just world. You cannot plant the wheat of the kingdom of heaven while letting the weeds of the world grow wild in the garden of your mind. 52. The philosophy of Jesus, the purpose of power. The world sees power as a means to dominate, to control, to make others serve oneself. It is power over others. God gives power to serve, to lift up, to liberate. It is power for others. A person cannot use power in both ways at the same time. How we behave when we have a little authority, whether in the family or at work, will show who we are serving. The mother of James and John came to ask Jesus for her 2 sons to sit at his right and left in his kingdom. The other disciples heard this and were indignant. Jesus called them together. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. He concluded, The power of the world is like a whip used to make others obey. The power of the kingdom of heaven is like a towel and a basin to stoop down and wash others' feet. You cannot hold both a whip and a basin. Choose one. 53. The philosophy of Jesus. Conditional forgiveness. The world's forgiveness often comes with conditions. I will forgive if you apologize. I will forgive if you compensate. I will forgive, but I will not forget. It is the forgiveness of an accountant, always keeping score. God's forgiveness is unconditional, a gift, a complete erasure. We cannot practice unconditional forgiveness if our hearts are still serving the master ego's justice. Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. He told the parable of the unmerciful servant who was forgiven a huge debt but refused to forgive his fellow servant a small one. He concluded, "When you refuse to forgive your brother, you are saying, 'I want to receive unconditional forgiveness from God, but I will dispense the conditional forgiveness of the world.' You cannot stand on both boats. When you receive a gift but refuse to give the same gift, you have made yourself a creditor, not a forgiven debtor." 54. The philosophy of Jesus, the art of listening. There are two kinds of listening: listening to reply, to find loopholes, to prepare one's rebuttal. This is the listening of someone serving their ego and argument. The second kind is listening to understand, to feel the pain and joy of others. This is the listening of someone serving love. Our hearts cannot truly open to understand if our minds are busy building defensive walls. Jesus was at the home of Martha and Mary. Martha was busy with all the preparations, while Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. When Martha complained, Jesus spoke of Mary choosing the better part. Later, he might have explained further to his disciples, "Martha was also listening to me, but she was listening to know what I needed, to serve better." That is the listening of responsibility. But Mary, she was listening not to do anything. She was listening just to be with me. That is the listening of love. You cannot truly hear a person's heart if your ears are busy listening to the voices of duties and worries. 55. The philosophy of Jesus, the fragrance of presence. Each person exudes an invisible fragrance, the result of who they are serving. The person serving competition and ambition will exude the smell of stress. The person serving pleasure will exude the smell of superficiality. The person serving God will exude the fragrance of peace, joy, and love. A fragrance that spreads and heals. A sinful woman anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume. The house was filled with the fragrance. Judas Iscariot, who was in charge of the money, grumbled, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." Jesus replied, "The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." He was teaching a profound lesson. Judas serves the master money, so he only smells the scent of wasted silver coins. But those who serve the master love, they smell the fragrance of a grateful heart. You are like a jar of perfume. Depending on for whom you open it, you will release a different fragrance to the world. 56. The philosophy of Jesus, the nature of hope. There are two kinds of hope. The hope of the world is an optimism based on circumstances. I hope it doesn't rain. I hope business goes well. It is fragile and easily shattered. The hope of faith does not depend on circumstances, but on the nature of the one in whom we hope. It is the firm trust that no matter what happens, our Master is still in control and loves us. Before his arrest, Jesus told his disciples, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." The Apostle Thomas might have thought, "How can we hope when you are about to be arrested and we will be scattered?" Jesus, as if reading his thoughts, "Your hope is not placed in me not being arrested or you not facing danger. That is the hope of the world. Your hope must be placed in the truth that not even death can overcome me. You cannot both hope for a good outcome according to your will and trust in the good plan according to the Father's will. Choose one." 57. The philosophy of Jesus, the rhythm of life. The world lives in a rhythm of haste. Faster, more, immediately. It is a master who constantly cracks the whip. God has his own rhythm. the rhythm of patience, of the right time, of the seed quietly sprouting. To live in grace is to learn to abandon the frantic rhythm of the world and dance to the gentle rhythm of God. Jesus' brothers urged him to go to Jerusalem to show himself to the world during the festival. Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come. For you any time is right." He was teaching them, you are living by the rhythm of the world, the rhythm of opportunity and calculation. You want to act when the time is ripe in the eyes of the world. But I live by the rhythm of my Father. I only act when He gives the signal. A person cannot both sprint at the call of ambition and walk gently in the guidance of the Holy Spirit. 58. The philosophy of Jesus. The view of the stranger. To the world, the stranger is a potential threat, a competitor, or an irrelevant person. It is a look of suspicion. To God, there are no strangers, only children we have not yet met. Every stranger is an opportunity to love, to serve, to see the image of God Himself. Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. A man was beaten by robbers and left for dead. A priest and a Levite, who served in the temple, passed by and avoided him. Jesus asked, "Why did they do that?" Then He answered Himself, "Because they were in a hurry to get to Jericho to serve God in the temple. They were afraid that if they touched the injured man, they would become unclean and unable to perform their duties. They were trying to serve both God and the laws of purity. But the Samaritan, who was considered a heretic, he served only one master at that moment: compassion. And in the end, who was the one who truly worshipped God?" 59. The philosophy of Jesus, the use of talents. All the talents we have, intelligence, artistic ability, business acumen, are a gift. The person who serves the world will use that talent to build their own empire, to seek fame and fortune. The person who serves God considers themselves a steward of that talent. They use it to glorify the one who gave it and to make the world a better place. Jesus told the parable of the talents. A master entrusted his servants with 5, 2, and 1 talent. The ones who received 5 and 2 talents put them to work and gained more. The one who received 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. The lazy servant said, "I knew that you are a hard man, so I was afraid." Jesus was explaining, this servant served the master fear. That fear paralyzed his talent. The other 2 served the master's trust and responsibility. They understood that the talents were not theirs, but their master's, and they had a duty to make them grow. Your talents are the same. If you use them to serve your own security, they will be buried. If you use them to serve the kingdom of heaven, they will multiply. 60. The philosophy of Jesus. The healing of wounds. When hurt, the world teaches us 2 ways: either take revenge or become calloused, building a wall around our hearts to avoid being hurt again. Both are forms of serving the ego and the pain. God invites a 3rd way, the way of transformation, transforming the wound into a source of empathy, turning the pain into a prayer, and making the one who hurt us an object of our forgiveness. On the cross, in the midst of extreme pain and humiliation, Jesus prayed. He did not say, "Father, punish them," nor did He remain silent in indignation. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." In that moment, He showed the ultimate choice. He refused to serve the master human justice or the master self-defense of the ego. Even in His last breath, He chose to serve only one master, the forgiving love of God. He showed that even the greatest wound can become a door for grace. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, We would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 61. The Philosophy of Jesus, the Nature of Wealth. The world measures wealth by what one can accumulate and keep for oneself. The kingdom of heaven measures wealth by what one can joyfully give away. A person cannot try to fill their barns and expand their hearts at the same time. True wealth is not having much, but needing little. A rich young man asked Jesus how to gain eternal life. He said he had kept all the commandments. Jesus looked at him and loved him. "One thing you lack," he said. "Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor. Then come, follow me." The young man went away sad. The Apostle Andrew asked, "Why couldn't he do it? He could have kept his wealth and followed you." Jesus replied, "Because his true master was not God, but his wealth. That master did not allow him to go. Wealth promised him security, but it took away his freedom. He could not choose both. True wealth is not what you hold in your hands, but what you hold in your heart." 62. The Philosophy of Jesus, the View of the Future. Serving the world makes us look at the future with anxiety or calculation. We try to plan, control, and insure against all risks. Serving God allows us to look at the future with trust and hope. We do not know what will happen, but we know who holds the future. This frees us from the burden of having to write the script for our own lives. Jesus spoke to his disciples about the destruction of the temple and the coming tribulations. They were terrified. The disciples asked, "When will this happen?" Jesus replied, "But about that day or hour no one knows. Be on guard, be alert." He was teaching, if you try to serve the Master's knowledge and certainty, you will live in fear because the future is always uncertain. But if you serve the Master faithfulness, your duty is not to know the future, but to live faithfully in the present. Entrust the future to the Father in heaven and take care of today. That is the division of labor in the kingdom of heaven. 63. The Philosophy of Jesus, the Purpose of the Law. For many people, the law is a master. They obey it for fear of punishment or to be considered righteous. For God, the law is not the master, but the guide. It is the map that shows us the path to love. If we focus too much on reading the map and forget the destination, we have made the map our master. The Pharisees and teachers of the law criticized Jesus' disciples for not washing their hands according to tradition before eating. Jesus called the crowd to him. "Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." He explained, "You are serving the master external purity of the law. You worry about dirty hands, but you do not pay attention to a dirty heart full of evil thoughts. The law was given to protect the heart, not to replace it. If you love God, you will naturally want to do things that please Him, not because the law compels you, but because love motivates you." 64. The Philosophy of Jesus, Silence before the enemy. When falsely accused, the world's instinct is to defend oneself, to argue, and to prove oneself right. This is serving the Master's honor and ego. But there is great power in intentional silence. It is not the silence of a coward, but the silence of one who trusts in a higher and more just ultimate judgment, the silence of one who entrusts their case to a greater master. When Jesus was brought before the high priest Caiaphas and then Governor Pilate, many false witnesses spoke against him. The high priest asked, Are you not going to answer?" Pilate also asked, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. His silence amazed them. Why? Because he refused to play their game. He refused to serve the logic of self-justification. His silence was a declaration. "I do not serve your court. I only serve the court of my Father." 65. The philosophy of Jesus. Godly sorrow. There are two kinds of sorrow. The sorrow of the world leads to despair, resentment, and death. It is the sorrow of Judas after his betrayal. But there is also a godly sorrow, a sorrow according to God's will. This sorrow leads to repentance, change, and life. It is the sorrow of Peter after denying the Lord. We cannot avoid sorrow, but we can choose which master that sorrow will serve. After Peter denied Jesus 3 times, he went outside and wept bitterly. His sorrow was a deep pain for having hurt the one he loved. Jesus, after his resurrection, did not mention Peter's sin. He turned his sorrow into an opportunity to reaffirm love. One can imagine Jesus explaining to the disciples, "The sorrow of the world tells you, you have failed, it's over. It serves condemnation. The sorrow of the kingdom of heaven says, you were wrong, but the Father's love is still there. Come back. It serves restoration. Do not let sorrow become your master. Make it the servant that leads you back to me." 66. The philosophy of Jesus. The price of fame. Fame is a very charming but also very dangerous master. It demands that we constantly maintain our image, please the crowd, and gradually lose our true selves. Jesus had every opportunity to become famous in the world's way, but he often withdrew and asked those he healed not to tell anyone. He refused to serve human adulation. After Jesus healed a man with leprosy, he warned him, "See that you don't tell anyone." But the man went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. The disciples might have wondered, why hide such a great miracle? Jesus explained, "If I let the master fame lead me, people will come to me for what I can do for them, not for who I truly am. They will want a miracle-working king, not a suffering savior. I cannot do the will of the crowd and the will of my Father at the same time." 67. The philosophy of Jesus. The wakefulness of the soul. Serving 2 masters causes the soul to fall into a state of slumber. We are lulled to sleep by material comforts, daily habits, and the promises of the world. Wakefulness is a state of readiness, aware of the spiritual battle taking place, and always looking towards the return of the Master. We cannot be asleep in the comfort of the world and awake waiting for the kingdom of heaven at the same time. Jesus told the parable of the 10 virgins who went to meet the bridegroom, 5 foolish and 5 wise. They all fell asleep. What was the difference? The 5 wise virgins had prepared extra oil. They had served the master readiness. The 5 foolish virgins had only served the master external presence. When the bridegroom arrived, the foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil." Jesus concluded, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Wakefulness is not about never getting tired, but about always being prepared in the heart. Your heart cannot hold both the oil of the Holy Spirit and the carelessness of the world. 68. The philosophy of Jesus, the source of creativity. The creativity of the world often comes from the ego, the desire to prove oneself, to create something new to be recognized. The creativity of the kingdom of heaven comes from cooperation with the Creator. It is the act of listening and turning inspirations from God into reality. An artist, a scientist, or a craftsman cannot both try to build a monument to themselves and try to be an instrument in God's hands. Jesus said, "The Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing." John, the beloved disciple, pondered this saying deeply. He understood that his teacher, in all his actions, from healing to teaching, was not the original author. He was the master artist who completely listened to the inspiration of the great Creator. John might have written, "The greatest creativity is not creating something from nothing, but becoming transparent so that the light of God can shine through." When you try to be the master of your work, you only have your limited talent. When you let God be the master, you share in his infinite creativity. 69. The philosophy of Jesus, the death of the ego. The greatest and hardest master for everyone to abandon is the ego. It demands to be recognized, protected, and prioritized. All the invitations of the world are ultimately to serve it. The path of following Christ is a path of dying to the ego daily. We cannot both nourish our ego to grow strong and let Christ grow in us. Jesus told his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." Peter, who was always strong and confident, did not understand this at first. He drew his sword to defend his teacher. That was the act of an ego that wanted to control the situation. Later, Peter understood. Carrying the cross is not a heroic act. It is a surrender. It is accepting that the teacher's path is not the path of power and victory in the world's way. It is the daily act when the ego wants to rise up to argue, to seek comfort, to be recognized, of nailing it to the cross and saying, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." 70. The philosophy of Jesus, the final choice. Ultimately, all of life comes down to a fundamental choice, repeated through countless small decisions. It is the choice between two principles, the principle of possession, the world, and the principle of giving, God. One side says, "Take for yourself." The other says, "Give away." One leads to a contracted heart, the other to an open heart. Standing before God, the only question will be, for whom did you live your life? Jesus told the parable of the final judgment. The Son of Man will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink." They will be surprised. "When did we see you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." In this parable, no one is asked about the creed they believe or the laws they keep. The only question is about action. The saved are those who lived their lives serving the needs of others, and in doing so, they unknowingly served the King himself. They chose the right master, even when they did not realize it. 71. The philosophy of Jesus, the bricks and weapons of words. Words are an incredibly powerful tool. When serving the world, words become weapons to attack, defend, spread rumors, and manipulate. They are used to build up one's own ego and tear others down. When serving God, words become bricks to build community, to encourage, heal, and speak the truth in love. The same tongue cannot be both a source of fresh water and a spring of bitter water. The Apostle James, who often reflected on the power of words, asked Jesus, James, "Teacher, I see people who use their tongues to praise God and also to curse their brothers who are made in His image. How can this be?" Jesus replied, "James, can a builder use the same brick to build a wall of the temple or to throw at a beggar?" James, "Yes, but his purpose is completely different." Jesus, "Exactly. The problem is not the brick, but the builder's heart. Your words are also bricks. Every time you open your mouth, ask yourself, for whom am I building? You cannot want to build the kingdom of heaven while throwing stones at the children of that kingdom. 72. The philosophy of Jesus, the view of failure. To the world, failure is a verdict. It defines a person, causes shame, and is the end point. It is proof that we are not good enough. To God, failure is not a verdict, but an opportunity to learn, a call to humility, and the place where grace is most clearly revealed. We cannot both serve the Master success at all costs and learn the precious lessons from the Master grace in weakness. After Jesus' arrest, the disciples were scattered in failure and fear. They had failed to stay with their teacher, failed to protect him. When Jesus appeared to them after his resurrection, he did not say, "You are a bunch of failures." He said, "Peace be with you." Later, perhaps he explained to them by the sea, "The world looks at your failure that night and says you are unworthy. That is the voice of condemnation. But my Father looks at your brokenness and sees a field ready to be replanted. Failure does not define who you are. How you rise after failure, with my help, is what does. Do not let failure be your master. Let it be your teacher." 73. The philosophy of Jesus, envy and admiration. Envy is an emotion that arises when we serve the ego and comparison. We see the success of others and feel that we have lost something. Admiration, on the other hand, is an emotion that arises when we serve God. We see the grace that God has given to others and can rejoice with them, recognizing that all good gifts come from one source. A heart cannot be filled with bitter envy and pure joy for others at the same time. John the Baptist was at the peak of his career when Jesus appeared, and the people began to follow him. John's disciples felt envious on behalf of their teacher. They said, "Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, well, he is baptizing, and everyone is going to him." John replied, "A person can receive only what is given them from heaven. He must become greater. I must become less." John showed that he did not serve the Master his own reputation. He served a greater Master, and therefore he could rejoice in Jesus' success. He had turned potential envy into an act of worship. 74. The philosophy of Jesus, the purpose of riches. The world teaches that the purpose of wealth is for enjoyment, security, and to display status. It is a destination. The kingdom of heaven teaches that wealth, if one has it, is only a tool, an entrusted resource. Its purpose is to be a flow, a channel of blessing to others. We cannot both view wealth as a lake to be hoarded and a river to flow. Jesus told the parable of the rich man and the poor Lazarus. The rich man feasted sumptuously every day, dressed in purple and fine linen. When they both died, the situation was reversed. Jesus was saying, the rich man's problem was not that he was rich. The problem was that he had made his wealth his master. He lived as if that wealth was only for his own enjoyment. He had built a dam around his assets and did not let it flow to the beggar at his gate. He had chosen a closed life, and in the end, he received a closed eternity. 75. The philosophy of Jesus, the meaning of tradition. Tradition can be a good teacher, but it can also be a bad master. When serving God, tradition is the foundation, the memory, the experience of our ancestors that helps us stand firm. When serving tradition itself, it becomes a kenturul, suffocating life and preventing us from encountering God in a new way. We cannot both revere the root and worship the shadow of the tree. The scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Jesus replied sharply, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition." He pointed out that they had turned tradition, which was meant to be a fence to protect the law, into the law itself. They had begun to serve the fence instead of the garden. When tradition prevents love and compassion, it has become a false master. 76. The philosophy of Jesus, the response to enemies. The logic of the world is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is the justice of retaliation, serving the wounded ego. The logic of the kingdom of heaven is a radical reversal. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This action is impossible if we are still serving the Master's personal safety and self-esteem. It can only come from a heart that completely trusts in God's protection and justice. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Someone in the crowd might have thought, "This is madness. If I don't hate the Roman soldier who beat me, who will protect my honor?" Jesus, as if answering that question, "When you hate your enemy, you have let their actions master your emotions. You have become their slave. But when you choose to love, you have regained mastery. You no longer act according to their provocation, but according to the nature of your Father in heaven, who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. You choose to serve love, not hate. 77. The philosophy of Jesus, joy and happiness. The world pursues happiness, an emotion dependent on what happenings. If things go well, we are happy. If not, we are unhappy. The kingdom of heaven brings joy, an inner state that is not dependent on circumstances. It originates from the relationship with God. A person cannot both build their life on the sand of temporary happiness and stand on the rock of eternal joy. Paul and Silas were beaten and thrown into prison in Philippi. Their feet were fastened in the stocks. About midnight, instead of groaning, they were praying and singing hymns to God. Although this story is from after Jesus' time, it perfectly illustrates his philosophy. Paul had learned from Jesus that external circumstances, being in prison, in pain, belong to the world's control, but the internal reaction belongs to his choice. He refused to serve the Master despair. Instead, he chose to serve the Master joy in the Lord. His joy came not from physical freedom, but from the freedom of the soul. 78. The philosophy of Jesus, intellect and wisdom. Intellect is knowledge, the accumulation of information. The world highly values intellect. Wisdom is the ability to apply that knowledge correctly in accordance with God's will. We can be very intelligent, but very foolish. Serving the Master knowledge can lead to pride. Serving the Master God will turn knowledge into humble wisdom. King Solomon, when he first ascended the throne, did not ask God for riches or victory. He asked for a listening heart so he could govern God's people. He asked for wisdom. Jesus, who is greater than Solomon, said to his disciples, the uneducated fisherman, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, and revealed them to little children. He was teaching that true wisdom comes not from reading many books, but from a humble heart, ready to listen. The scribes and Pharisees had a great deal of knowledge about the Scriptures, but they lacked the wisdom to recognize the One standing before them. They served the letter, not the spirit behind the letter. 79. The philosophy of Jesus. Oaths and truthfulness. The world needs oaths, contracts, and guarantees because human words are not trustworthy. People have to swear by something greater to give their words weight. In the kingdom of heaven, the ideal is that a person's word should have value in itself. Absolute truthfulness makes all oaths unnecessary. A person cannot both live in truth and have to rely on oaths to prove that truth. Jesus taught, "Do not swear an oath at all. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." A merchant in the crowd might have thought, "How can I do business if I don't swear? Who will believe me?" Jesus, as if to say, "That's the point. You have to swear because you are living in a system that serves doubt. Your word is not strong enough. But if you live a life that serves only the truth, the consistency between your words and actions will become the most powerful oath. You don't need to swear by the temple, because you are the temple. You don't need to swear by heaven, because the kingdom of heaven is within you. 80. The philosophy of Jesus. The care of the body. There are two extremes in caring for the body. One is to worship it, serving its beauty, health, and pleasure as a master. The other is to despise it, seeing it as a prison for the soul. Both are wrong. The Lord's way is to see the body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. We care for it not for its own sake, but for the one who dwells in it. Jesus ate and drank with sinners, so much so that he was called a glutton and a drunkard. He also spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness. He showed balance. When John's disciples asked why his disciples did not fast, he answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them?" When he spoke of cutting off a hand or gouging out an eye if it caused you to sin, he did not mean it literally. He was teaching that the body is a good servant, but a bad master. It is not the ultimate goal. Take care of it so that it can serve the kingdom of heaven well. But if it begins to demand mastery and drags your soul down, be ready to cut off its desires. Do not worship the temple. Worship the God who dwells in the temple. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 81. The philosophy of Jesus. The measurement of success. The world measures success by numbers. Money in the bank, number of followers, size of the company. It is an external and visible measure. The kingdom of heaven measures success by invisible values, the degree of faithfulness, growth in love, silent sacrifice. A person can look very successful in the eyes of the world, but be a complete failure before God, and vice versa. Jesus told the parable of the sower. Some seed produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He did not say that the seed that produced 30 was a failure. He only said that they had produced a crop on good soil. This implies that success is not an absolute number, but bearing fruit according to the ability and circumstances that God gives. A poor widow who gives 2 small coins may be more successful than a rich man who gives a bag of gold. Do not let the world's measure master your peace. Just focus on being faithful with what has been entrusted to you, whether little or much. 82. The philosophy of Jesus. Hospitality. The world's hospitality often involves calculation. We invite people who can benefit us, people who can invite us back. It is a form of networking. The hospitality of the kingdom of heaven is the opposite. We open our hearts and our doors to those who cannot repay us, the poor, the crippled, the stranger. It is an act of serving God himself, who is hidden in the least of these. Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, although they cannot repay you." He was presenting a clear choice. For whom are you hosting this banquet? For your social investment, or for a disinterested joy? A banquet can be a business transaction, or it can be an act of worship. You cannot make it both. 83. The philosophy of Jesus, facing injustice. When faced with injustice, the world teaches us to demand justice by our own strength, to fight, to condemn. This is serving the master justice according to human standards. The way of the Lord is not passivity, but an active resistance with love and truth, while entrusting the final judgment to God. It is the trust that light will ultimately overcome darkness. Jesus told the parable of the persistent widow and the unjust judge. The widow kept coming to him, and finally the judge had to grant her justice, not because he feared God, but because he was tired. Jesus concluded, "And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night?" He did not tell the widow to gather an army. He held up her persistent prayer as an example. He taught that, in the face of an unjust system, the strongest weapon of the believer is not the sword of the world, but perseverance in prayer, an act that serves the belief that there is a supreme and more just judge than all. 84. The philosophy of Jesus, the value of obedience. Obedience out of fear is the obedience of a slave. Obedience for reward is the obedience of a hired hand. Both are forms of conditional service. The obedience of the kingdom of heaven comes from love and trust. It is the obedience of a child who believes that what their father asks is always for the best, even when they do not fully understand. At the wedding in Cana, the wine ran out. Mother Mary spoke to Jesus and then turned to the servants and said an immortal line, "Do whatever he tells you." The servants did not question. Why pour water into the jars? What for? They simply obeyed, and the miracle happened. They did not serve their own logic. They did not serve their own experience. Water cannot become wine. They chose to serve a single authority in that moment. Their simple, trusting obedience opened the way for God's power to act. 85. The philosophy of Jesus, freedom from the past. The past can be a very cruel master. It binds us with regrets, failures, and hurts. The world often teaches us either to forget it or to be obsessed by it. The kingdom of heaven teaches another way, to redeem the past, to bring the broken pieces of the past to God and let him turn them into a mosaic of grace. The Samaritan woman was bound by her past with 5 husbands. It defined her in everyone's eyes and in her own. When Jesus revealed that past, he did not do it to condemn her. He did it to free her. He said, "Go, call your husband." He invited her to face the truth. When she was set free, she was no longer the woman with a shameful past. She became the first evangelist of the Messiah to her entire village. She had refused to let the master past continue to rule. She had chosen a new master, one who had the power to rewrite the final chapter of her life's story. 86. The Philosophy of Jesus. Understanding the real enemy. The world teaches that our enemies are people of flesh and blood, a difficult boss, a troublesome neighbor, a competitor. We spend our energy fighting them. The Bible teaches that our real struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of darkness. When we recognize the real enemy, we will stop fighting our brothers and sisters and start fighting with the weapons of the kingdom of heaven: prayer, truth, and love. When Peter tried to dissuade Jesus from the path of the cross, Jesus turned and said a very strong word to Peter: "Get behind me, Satan." He did not say, "Peter, you are wrong." He spoke directly to the force behind Peter's words. He was teaching an important lesson. Peter was not the enemy. The enemy was the temptation to choose an easier path, a path that served self-preservation instead of the Father's will. When we fight, let's make sure we are aiming at the right enemy. Don't waste energy fighting against the people God calls us to love. 87. The Philosophy of Jesus. The temptation of religion. One of the most subtle false masters is religion. It's when we begin to serve the rituals, the rules, the church activities, instead of serving God Himself. We can be very busy with the Lord's work and forget the Lord of the work. Religion can become a veil that hides a true personal relationship. Jesus healed a man with a withered hand in the synagogue on the Sabbath. The Pharisees watched him, not with compassion for the sick man, but to see if he would break the law. They cared more about the rule than the person. They loved their religion more than the God of mercy. Jesus exposed them with a simple question: which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? They remained silent because they knew the answer would condemn them. They had chosen to serve an empty religious system instead of a living God. 88. The Philosophy of Jesus. A vision beyond death. Death is the ultimate martyr of the world. All human fears, ambitions, and accumulations are dominated by it. The fear of death makes us cling to this life at all costs. Faith in the resurrection frees us from the dominion of death. It gives us a vision that extends beyond the grave and allows us to live a life of courage and generosity. Martha said to Jesus, "My brother would not have died if you had been here." She still believed in Jesus' power over life, but Jesus raised her vision higher. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." He did not come just to delay death. He came to defeat it. When we truly believe this, we no longer serve the master fear of death. We can live freely, give generously, because we know that our most precious things cannot be taken away by death. 89. The Philosophy of Jesus. The father-child relationship. The world often sees God as a distant king, a stern judge, or a cosmic force. This is a master-servant relationship. Jesus came to reveal a completely new and revolutionary relationship, the father-child relationship. When we truly live as a child, our obedience is no longer a burden, but a joy. Prayer is no longer a duty, but a conversation. When the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray, he began with 2 words that changed everything: Our Father. He did not say, "O King of the universe, O Almighty One." By teaching them to call God Father, he elevated them from the status of servants to children. He gave them a key to escape from service based on fear. A child does not work to be loved. A child works because they are loved. This is the core difference between the 2 masters. 90. The Philosophy of Jesus. The completion. The life of one who serves 2 masters will always be unfinished, always with a sense of lack, an unachieved goal. because those two masters pull them in opposite directions. The life of one who serves a single master, though it may be full of hardships, will have a completeness and a clear purpose. The pinnacle of that life is to be able to say, like Jesus, "It is finished." On the cross, just before breathing his last, Jesus said, "It is finished." What had he finished? Not a successful life by worldly standards. He had no property, no family of his own, and was abandoned by his closest disciples. He had finished one single thing, the will of the Father. He had lived a completely consistent life, serving one single master from beginning to end. Every action, every word, every miracle, and finally his death were all part of a great symphony with a single theme. That is the ultimate integrity, the victory of an undivided loyalty. 91. The philosophy of Jesus, the gatekeeper of the mind. Our mind is a garden, and thoughts are seeds. The world constantly throws in seeds of anxiety, desire, envy, and bitterness. To serve the world means to let those seeds grow wild. To serve God means to become a vigilant gatekeeper, consciously choosing which thoughts to cultivate and which to uproot. We cannot let the thoughts of two opposing masters coexist peacefully in our minds. After a long day of facing criticism and demands, the Apostle John said to Jesus, "John, Teacher, my mind feels so chaotic. How can I keep my peace amidst these disturbances?" Jesus asked back, "John, would you let just anyone come into your house and throw trash there?" John, "No, teacher, I would close the door." Jesus, "Your mind is also a house, and you are the gatekeeper. You cannot stop people from throwing bad thoughts your way, but you have the right to decide not to open the door and invite them in. When a thought of worry comes, say, 'I serve the Father of peace.' When a thought of envy comes, say, 'I serve the Father of all blessings.' Do not turn your mind into an inn for the world's passers-by. Reserve it as a private home for one single master. 92. The philosophy of Jesus, the nature of peace. The world seeks peace as the absence of conflict, as external quiet. It is a fragile state, easily broken. The peace that God gives, shalom, is not the absence of the storm, but the presence of God in the midst of the storm. It is a deep trust in His sovereignty. We cannot have this peace if part of our mind is still trying to control the waves ourselves. Before His arrest, Jesus told His disciples, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." The Apostle Philip might have wondered, "What peace when you are about to leave and we will face danger?" Jesus, as if answering, "The peace of the world is a still lake. A single stone causes ripples. My peace is a deep river flowing underground. The surface may be turbulent, but the current below is steady. It does not come from everything around you being okay. It comes from knowing that, no matter what happens, you are in my Father's hands. Do not try to find peace in two places." 93. The philosophy of Jesus, the burden of expectations. One of the most subtle false masters is the expectations of others. We try to live up to the image of a devout person in everyone's eyes, following the rules to be praised. This burden is exhausting and artificial. Serving God frees us from that burden. Our only concern is to live authentically in the father-child relationship, not to perform a role for a worldly audience. Jesus was eating at a Pharisee's house, and he did not wash his hands according to custom. The Pharisee was surprised. Jesus said, "Now then, You Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. He was exposing them. You are not truly serving purity. You are serving the master societal expectations. You act the way you think a righteous person should act, but your hearts are far away. Stop worrying about what others think. Only care about what the Father in heaven, who sees in secret, thinks of you. 94. The philosophy of Jesus, the simplicity of the destination. The world makes life complicated with countless goals. Be successful, be healthy, be happy, have many experiences. It pulls us in 100 different directions. Jesus came to simplify everything radically. All the law and the prophets hang on one thing: love God, love your neighbor. When we have a single, simple destination, all other choices in life become clear. A teacher of the law came and asked Jesus, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" Jesus replied, "The most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself." He did not give a long list. He gave a compass. He was, as if to say, don't try to serve 100 little masters of laws and rules. Just serve the one great master of love. If you do that, everything else will automatically fall into its proper place. 95. The philosophy of Jesus, the use of influence. Every person has a certain sphere of influence, whether large or small. To serve the world means to use that influence to consolidate one's position, to gain profit, and to get others to follow you. To serve God means to use that influence as a stewardship, to lift others up, to point them to the truth, and to make the community better. After John the Baptist was beheaded, Jesus' fame grew. King Herod heard about him and was afraid. Herod had great power and influence, but he used it to serve his paranoia and pleasure. Jesus, on the other hand, when the crowds sought him, he had compassion on them and healed them. He was showing two models of using influence. One uses it to protect his throne. The other uses it to serve the sheep without a shepherd. When you gain a little influence, even with just one person, ask yourself, am I using it to draw them to me or to point them to the Lord? 96. The philosophy of Jesus, the fight against cynicism. The world, with its injustices and suffering, is fertile ground for cynicism. It is a whispering voice that says, nothing is good, everything is fake, don't trust anyone. Serving cynicism will make our hearts hard and cold. Faith is a deliberate resistance against that cynicism. It is choosing hope, choosing to believe in goodness, even when there is no clear evidence. The Apostle Thomas, after hearing of the resurrection, said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, I will not believe." Thomas was not a bad person. He was just a man, serving the Master visible evidence, a product of a deceitful world. When Jesus appeared, he did not rebuke Thomas's cynicism. He invited him to overcome it. Put your finger here. Stop doubting and believe. Then he pronounced a blessing for all of us. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. He was saying that trusting in goodness when you cannot see it is the highest act of loyalty to a good master. 97. The philosophy of Jesus, the calling in daily life. The world divides work into two categories: sacred work and secular work. It makes us think that only those who work in the church are serving God. The perspective of the kingdom of heaven is different. All work, from farming to business, from homemaking to governing, can become a sacred calling if it is done with the right purpose, to glorify God and serve others. Jesus, for the first 30 years of his life, was a carpenter in Nazareth. He performed no miracles, gave no public sermons. He just worked with wood, with chisels, and with rulers. By his hidden life, he sanctified manual labor. He was, as if to say, my service to my Father did not begin only at my baptism. It was expressed in every table and chair I made. A carpenter can serve the master profit by doing shoddy work, using bad wood, or he can serve the master excellence and faithfulness by making the best products possible, as a prayer with his hands. Whatever your work is, it can be a pulpit. 98. The Philosophy of Jesus, the Anatomy of Idols. Idols are not just statues of gold or stone. An idol is anything we put in God's place in our hearts. It can be family, career, money, knowledge, or even a distorted image of God himself. Serving two masters is, in essence, the act of idolatry. We keep God, but we also set up another altar in our hearts for another master. Jesus said, "Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." This is a shocking statement. He was not against family love at all. He was exposing the nature of idolatry. He knew that even the best things, like family love, can become a master, an idol that prevents us from following the highest call. When our decision is dominated by, "I must provide for my family," more than "I must do God's will," then family has become our master. Love your family, but worship God alone. 99. The Philosophy of Jesus, strength in weakness. The world worships strength, confidence, and self-reliance. Weakness is seen as a flaw to be hidden. The kingdom of heaven operates on a reverse logic. It is in our weakness that God's power is made perfect. When we admit our powerlessness, we open a space for grace to act. We cannot both rely on our own strength and experience the power of God. The Apostle Paul later wrote, "I was given a thorn in my flesh. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" This principle comes directly from Jesus. Imagine when he chose his disciples. He did not choose the wise, the powerful, or the wealthy. He chose ordinary fishermen, a hated tax collector. Why? Because in their weakness and ordinariness, when the kingdom of heaven was proclaimed, everyone would know that the power did not come from them, but from God. They were jars of clay, so that the treasure within could shine. 100. The Philosophy of Jesus, the final commandment. After all the philosophies, parables, and teachings, everything is condensed into one final commandment, one ultimate test of loyalty. It is not a list of complicated rules, but a simple action. Love. Love is not an emotion, but an act of service. To serve love is to serve God, for God is love. On the night before he suffered, at the Last Supper, Jesus did not give a complex theological lecture. He said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." This is the summary of everything. You can keep all the laws, know all the scriptures, but if you do not love, you are still serving another master. Perhaps the ego, self-righteousness, or fear. Love is the unmistakable sign that you have chosen the right master. 101. The Philosophy of Jesus, worship in spirit and in truth. The world's worship is often tied to a specific place, this temple, a specific form, this ritual. It is limited worship. Jesus came to open up a new form of worship, not limited by space or form. It is worship in spirit and in truth, a life completely in harmony with God's will, at all times, in all places. We cannot both worship in Jerusalem on a feast day and worship money in the market on a weekday. The Samaritan woman asked Jesus a religious question. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus declared, "Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth." He was breaking down the distinction between sacred place and secular place. He was saying that the human heart is the true temple. A life lived in truth and led by the Spirit is the highest act of worship, a worship that takes place 24/7, for one single Master. 102. The philosophy of Jesus, the harvest of life. Every day lived is a day of sowing. Our thoughts, words, and actions are the seeds we sow in the field of time. To serve the world is to sow seeds of selfishness, bitterness, and desire. To serve God is to sow seeds of love, joy, and peace. We cannot sow one type of seed and expect to reap another type of fruit. The final harvest of life will show which master we have truly been farming for. Jesus told the parable of the weeds among the wheat. The servants wanted to pull up the weeds immediately, but the master said, "No, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest." He was teaching about God's patience and the certainty of judgment. He also implied that in the field of this world and in our hearts, two types of seeds coexist. Our daily choice is which plant to water. We cannot both tend to the wheat of kindness and cultivate the thorns of selfishness and expect both to bear abundant fruit. The harvest will settle everything. 103. The philosophy of Jesus, freedom from comparison. One of the main games of the world is the comparison game. Who is richer? Who is smarter? Who is more successful? Serving this game is a form of endless slavery, because there is always someone better than us. Serving God frees us from that game. We realize that each person has their own path, their own calling, and their own relationship with God. Our job is not to look at the person next to us, but to look up to the one who is leading us. After the resurrection, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" and gave him the mission to feed his sheep. Immediately after, Peter saw John and asked a very human question. "Lord, what about him?" Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." This is a liberating word. Jesus was saying, do not compare your calling with someone else's. Do not serve curiosity and comparison. You have only one thing to do. Focus on the relationship between you and me, and follow the path I have set for you. 104. The philosophy of Jesus, the ultimate identity. The world gives us many identities: profession, nationality, family background, achievements. We cling to them and serve to maintain those identities. But they are all temporary. The kingdom of heaven gives us a single, eternal identity: beloved child of God. When we live from this identity, all other identities become secondary. We are no longer driven by the need to prove ourselves. When Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River, Before he performed any miracles or taught anything, a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." This was his foundational identity. He acted not to become the beloved Son, but because he already was the beloved Son. When the devil tempted him in the wilderness, he always began with, "If you are the Son of God." He was attacking his identity, inviting him to prove that identity with worldly actions. Jesus refused. He knew who he was, and he did not need to prove it to anyone but his Father. 105. The philosophy of Jesus. The invitation, not compulsion. The masters of the world, ambition, money, power, often rule by force and fear. They give us no choice. God, the true master, always rules by invitation. He never forces. The door to the heart can only be opened from the inside. The final choice, and the daily one, is always ours. To serve him is not a surrender in defeat, but a response in love. After Jesus gave a difficult teaching about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. He did not run after them. He did not lower his standards. He turned to the 12 and asked a question full of freedom and also of pain. "You do not want to leave too, do you?" He gave them the right to choose. Peter answered for all who have chosen the right master. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." Peter's answer was not that of a slave, but of someone who had realized that there is only one place to find true life. That is the pinnacle of all philosophy, the free choice that comes from a heart conquered by love. Dear friends, Church Audio sincerely thanks you for journeying with us through the 105 philosophies from the teaching "No one can serve two masters." We hope this series has brought a deep insight that choosing a single master for oneself is not a constraint, but the path to true freedom and peace. Now the remaining invitation is for each of us to contemplate who our hearts are truly serving in our daily lives. If you find this content meaningful, please support the channel by hitting the like button, sharing the video with those who need to hear it, and subscribing to Church Audio to not miss our upcoming programs. We also look forward to reading your comments, sharing the philosophy that resonated with you the most. Once again, thank you for listening. Wishing you a peaceful and grace-filled day. Warm regards. 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 Warm regards.